What's up, guys? Artist Streaming here. So last night we got episode 3 of The Last of Us, and there were a ton of major changes to the story compared to the game. Now there's going to be a ton of major spoilers of both the game and the show moving forward, so keep that in mind. If you played the game, then you probably noticed that last night's episode was pretty much nothing like the game at all. Now, in the game, Joel and Ellie are on their way to meet Bill in Lincoln, Massachusetts, where they're hoping that Bill can help them out with a new car. When they arrive, they are caught up in some of Bill's traps, and you experience one of the most iconic survival scenes in the game. An angry Bill meets them and reluctantly agrees to help them find a car battery which they can escape with. While searching for the battery, we end up finding out that somebody Bill knows named Frank actually ended up taking the last battery in the area and probably tried escaping with it. After this, they decide to regroup at Bill's house, where we actually end up finding Frank and what happened to him. After being bit while recovering the battery, it seems as though Frank unalived himself. This is where we find out that Bill and Frank were more than friends, they were actually partners. Bill gives Joel and Ellie the car battery, but the battery is dead and they'll have to push start it in order to get the car running. After one final run-in with infected, Joel and Ellie end up leaving Bill behind to stay in his own town. While all of this seems very eventful, it doesn't actually do too much for character building, which is why I believe that most of this was cut out of the show. Instead, in episode 3, we get the full history of Bill and Frank. It starts with Bill, a survivalist living in a hidden basement bunker in Lincoln, Massachusetts. All of a sudden, his town is evacuated, and he ends up being the only one left hiding in the bunker. He's left to scavenge surrounding towns in order to find supplies so that he can build traps and beef security up so that he can keep infected out. This seems to work pretty well for about 4 years until one of his traps catches a wild Frank. An alarm goes off and Bill goes out fully armed to meet his new guest. After deciding Frank isn't too much of a threat, he decides to let him in and clean up and cook him a meal, and then he can be on his way. After the meal, Bill and Frank share a moment over Bill's rendition of a Linda Ronstadt song, and they decide that maybe Frank should stay. Fully in love now, 3 years later, we see Bill and Frank cleaning up their town and living a very peaceful, loving life. Frank tells Bill that he made a new friend over the CB radio and he thinks that he should invite his new friends over. With how trusting Bill is, this doesn't go over too well, but like most relationships, it's usually better to just give in, and Bill ends up doing that. We see Tess, Joel, Frank, and Bill gun in hand enjoying a nice meal. Bill is still weary of his new guests, but Joel reaffirms that he understands and that actually this new friendship can be beneficial to both parties through trade. Joel also warns Bill that infected aren't his only issue that he needs to look out for. Eventually, raiders will try to come and take over his home. 3 years later, pretty much exactly that happens. Bill's traps end up taking care of most of the raiders, but Bill goes out to try to fight off the rest of them, and in the process, he ends up getting shot. Frank ends up retrieving Bill, bringing him inside, and taking care of him. Bill survives. 10 years later, it's Bill's turn to take care of Frank because now Frank is sick and confined to a wheelchair. Frank tells Bill that it's his last day and that he wants Bill to help him go peacefully. But before he does that, he wants to get married and have one final meal with Bill. After the meal, Bill tells Frank that he's not going alone and that this is going to be both of their final nights. Now, in my opinion, this new story of Bill and Frank is a much more satisfying ending to their story. We learn about the journey that they went through and the love story that they formed along the way. In the end, Joel and Ellie arrive to find a quiet house with a letter explaining exactly what happened to Bill and Frank, and that all of Bill's supplies were left to Joel, including the truck keys and his bunker weapons. Bill goes on in the letter to tell Joel that life is precious and he must do everything he can to protect Tess, and this hits hard. Hearing this serves as a reminder of his failures not only with Tess, but his daughter as well, and as we know, will end up being the motivation for him to protect Ellie in the future, even though he doesn't quite realize it yet. Much like the game, Joel ends up telling Ellie that their goal now is to head to Wyoming to meet Joel's brother, where hopefully he can reunite Ellie with the Fireflies. Now, while the meat and potatoes of the stories didn't quite match up, the beginning and end goals stayed true. In my opinion, I really enjoyed HBO's expansion of the universe, and I think episode 3 worked pretty beautifully. So, I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. Let me know down in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.